Before you get started on replacing your factory Chevelle or A-body rear end with a Currie Crate rear end, you need to get the car up in the air, supported well with jack stands, and pull off the tires and wheels. The first step in replacing your factory rear end with a Currie Crate rear end is to remove the shocks on both sides. You may need to load the suspension to get the shocks separated and the control arms off. Unbolt the drive shaft and remove it from the car. With the drive shaft out of the way, disconnect the factory brake hose at the housing. You need to remove both housing lines from the brake hose to separate it from the housing. We are replacing the factory ebrake cables with a new Currie ebrake cable kit. Since we are upgrading to disc brakes, new cables are required, so remove your old cables from both sides. Unbolt both upper control arms at the housing and push them up out of the way. Once the upper control arms are unbolted, lower the rear end back down and remove the springs on both sides. It is now time to remove the lower control arms. Make sure the rear end is supported well. Unbolt the lower control arms at the housing only and separate them from the rear end. You may need to use a mallet to get them to slide out of the brackets. At this point, your factory housing should be ready to come out of the car. With the rear end out of the way, it's a good time to clean up any areas that may need it. Here is the new Currie Crate rear end for our A-body. This rear end comes with everything disassembled for easier shipping and contains nearly everything needed, including 31 spline axles, drummer disc brakes, a complete third member with options tailored for your needs, and all the gaskets and seals for assembly. To assemble, use gasket sealer on both sides of the third member gasket before installing the third member. Place the third member onto the housing and use the supplied nuts to attach it. Torque the nuts to 35 foot-pounds. All of the components will arrive unpainted, ready for your favorite color. It's best to paint the axles before installing them into the housing. Use the supplied T-bolts and attach the brake backing plates. Use a little silicone on the outside of the axle seal to ensure that there are no leaks. Also, coat the splines of the axles with grease so they slide into the carrier easier. Once the axles are ready, slide them into their corresponding sides and remove the sticker cover. With disc brakes, it may be difficult to get the nuts started onto the T-bolts. Once they are all started, tighten them evenly until the backing plate is tight against the axle flange. Use a torque wrench and tighten them to 35 foot-pounds. Once both sides are complete, slide the rotors and calipers onto the backing plates. Use Loctite on the caliper bolts to ensure they stay tight. Attach the supplied brake hoses to the calipers and to the housing. It's best to get your brake lines bent and fitted before installing your new crate rear end. We chose to make a new bracket to mount the brake hose to, but it may be possible to modify your factory bracket to work on your new crate rear end. It is now time to install the new crate rear end into your car. Slide it into the car and raise it up until it's near the factory ride height. This will help with the alignment of the control arms. Raise the lower control arms up into the new housing. It's a tight fit, so you may need to use a mallet to get them all the way into the brackets. Once they are in, snug them but don't tighten them until the car is back on the ground at ride height. Lower the upper control arms onto the new housing on each side and tighten. Due to the Johnny joint rod ends, the top arms can be tightened while the car is in the air. With the control arms attached, let the rear end down far enough to install the coil springs. Attach the brake hose onto the new housing and finish making the hard brake lines. If you don't have the tools to make a double flare, then get the lines bent and cut to the correct length, and then take the lines to a qualified shop to have the flares made. Reattach the factory shocks or new shocks onto the chassis and the rear end. Grease the Johnny joints and lightly grease the transmission splines of the drive shaft. Reinstall the drive shaft and tighten. It's important not to tighten the U-bolts too tight or it may damage your U-joint. Before moving on to the ebrake cables, add oil to your new crate rear end. We recommend 9+ gear oil for all of our rear ends. Also, if you choose a limited slip differential, you'll need to add a friction modifier. If you chose to upgrade to disc brakes, you will need to replace your factory ebrake cables with new cables. These are available through Currie and can be shipped with your crate rear end. Start by placing one end of the cable sleeves into the loops on the brake backing plates. Slide the other ends into the receiver on the frame and mark the sleeves where they should be cut. Use a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters to trim the sleeves. Use the supplied fittings to attach the sleeves to the brake backing plates and the frame on both sides, then tighten. Slide the cables through the sleeves and attach the end bracket to the ebrake lever at the brake backing plate. The universal ebrake cable kit uses a block that may need to be drilled out to fit onto the factory ebrake rod. Once the block is attached to the ebrake rod, slide the cables through the small holes until the cables are snug. Use the Allen set screws to tighten and secure the cables into the block. Once you feel the ebrake is adjusted and working properly, cut off the excess cable. Once this step is complete, your new crate rear end should be completely installed with only a few more steps to go. Reattach the rear wheels and tires and set your car back onto the ground. Torque the wheels to the manufacturer's specifications. From underneath, finish tightening the lower control arms to the housing. Torque the lower control arms to 85 foot-pounds. The final step is to bleed the brakes. If you don't know how to do this, have your vehicle towed to your local shop and have it done for you. Once your brakes are bled, the Currie Crate Rearend installation is complete. Make sure to follow the break-in procedure for track lock type differentials and enjoy your new Currie Crate Rearend. For more information on our complete line of crate rear ends, log on to currieenterprises.com.